And we're talking about Christie now. And Dominic, to me, I still think, and we've got the timeline of the events rolling on the ticker at the bottom of the screen, which I think is really telling here, because if you remember, I think people forget, Christie was doing the press conference, making jokes that he was the guy laying out the cones and everything else, months after the Wall Street Journal first reported about at least the allegations of the story, which he denied on at least 4 different occasions. The point that he made, and he's been making it more nuanced, but he made it clearly yesterday, was the standard I should be held to is, did I have any role in the planning of the closure of the bridge? And then when pressed a little bit more, and he goes, well, I heard something, but I figured there was a bridge, there was some study that was going on, which we already have testimony from the other side of the Port Authority saying they knew of no existence of any study. It's that gap. It's that 2-month area about when he found out about it. What did he do about it? We don't know yet. This is all circumspect, but isn't that the key window of time?
It's called shifting the goalposts. The governor wants to play by his own rules. And guess what? He's not going to be allowed to do that. You are 1,000% correct. He's engaging, or he did at least last night on the radio, in double talk from what he initially said at his mammoth news conference. And the reporter that you had on at the top of the show tonight, she is 1,000% correct. It is amazing to watch the governor, as far as Wildstein says that there's evidence, and then all of a sudden, 72 hours later, the governor says, oh yeah, well maybe I heard something, but I had nothing to do with the planning. Hogwash.
In some ways, OB, the style that's made this governor so successful, right? This authentic self, that there is no, you don't have to parse what he's saying. You know what he says when he says it. In a funny way, it sets a different standard for him, because he can't be now all of a sudden nuanced and expect to be taken seriously.
To say he knew about it when it was reported, we don't know what date he's claiming that was, and Wildstein is not a credible witness at this point, which is one of the reasons he's tearing apart in public.
Wait, letter, I'm going to let you finish. But the governor, I thought, and I like and respect this governor, but for him to say that he acted up in social studies class and that he had a problem with the paper, which, by the way, the school, as if it matters, came out, the 2 principals from the high school, and said that that was an exaggerated claim. The kid was fine. Wildstein, now 30 years later or whatever it is. It sounds pathetic.
What happened in high school isn't the issue.
Then why is he not credible?
What I'm looking at here is the letter that was written by his lawyer asking for money for the taxpayers to defend himself. For Wildstein says, and evidence exists as well as tying Mr. Christie to having knowledge of the lane closures. It says it exists. Why wasn't it in the documents you first gave, or do you not have it and you're claiming somebody else has it, and then who is it you're claiming has it? He's ambiguous in this whole thing. There's no fact in here.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
And then
I thought that was an outreach to say, I'd like immunity.
And then he continues, though. He says,
everybody calm down.
And then he continues, I contest the accuracy of statements made about me, meaning the comments the governor made in that press conference about Wildstein, he contests those as well. That's what this is.
The crime is in the planning and execution of the lane closures. The political damage is in trying to cover it up.
Yeah.
So if Christie knew before it happened, or gave permission to go forward with a lane closure that was based on nothing but political retribution, he's impeachable.
Yeah.
And
let's say he didn't know for this conversation. No. But he found out after the fact what happened, and at least publicly, he made the jokes about moving the cones and everything else as an attempt to deflect. What about the political consequences for something like that?
The political consequences are enormous, but the criminal consequences are not. What people are taking the Fifth Amendment about isn't political consequences.
Well, they were directly involved before.
They don't want to go to jail.
Well, no,
and therefore,
but we still don't know what the criminal charges would be on closing a bridge that you shouldn't have closed.
But let's go back a second.
Theft, use of public resources.
What do they steal?
The expenses that were used to cause that were used for reasons that were not legitimate, not appropriate, and amount to a theft of public property. There's plenty
Richard, that's a stretch, and you know
It's not a stretch in the least.
Let's make this very clear.
It's called theft of honest services. It's called fraud. It's called...
There was nothing done. Let's make this very clear. The reason that they are taking the Fifth and not putting documents forward is because there's a cloud of a U.S. attorney hanging over them. And as we all know, a U.S. attorney will bring up a number of charges to throw the book to get some sort of plea. That's what the concern is.
We know that U.S. attorneys do that?
That's what they do all the time.
I see. And there's nothing to it.
What I'm saying to you is, if there's nothing wrong, even when we see many cases where people misspeak without attorneys present, and then they end up going to jail for that.
Are you suggesting that if they actually created that traffic jam for political purposes, that a crime wasn't committed?
Last night there was an attorney on this set saying the same thing.
Our friend Bill Aaronwald, who says, I'm still looking for the crime. Well, now, not the political malfeasance, but the crime.
I can help him. It's called theft of honest services. It's called fraud.
Which has been thrown out on appeal.
Guys, I want to get a process question here. We had agreement by the Assembly and State Senate that they're going to have a joint committee now. Prior to that, they were having separate. Is that strictly for expedience purposes so they don't duplicate subpoenas and at least share information, or is there any other value to it? It's
common sense. They ought to just wait till the evidence comes in, examine the evidence, make the evidence public. That's what a good investigation would do.
But it's still controlled by the opposition party. It's still a democratically controlled committee.
But it takes a back seat to the U.S. attorney.
No, if they were truly...
It takes a back seat to the U.S. attorney's investigation.
If they were truly going to be thorough and fair, it would be a balanced investigation instead of a Democratic partisan attack, which is what this has become.
You have Republicans that are also on the committees.
I'm not saying they're not, but when they're outvoted and when the committee is controlled by Democrats and what their investigators do and what their counsel decides is controlled by the opposition party. That's not a fair and balanced
Do you suggest
investigation.
that the Judiciary Committee in the U.S. Senate, when they're actually conducting investigations because there's more Republicans, they should give it up so more Democrats should be on it?
Democrats right now.
You're talking when Darrell Issa in the House, when the House does its investigations, they're not fair and balanced?
What they have the opportunity to do is control the agenda.
Answer the question I asked you.
That's what they control,
when the House
agenda.
Republicans do it, is it fair?
It's fair because it's what they believe it is.
You can't argue with this.
What I'm saying is...
Dominic, I have an interesting question, or at least I think it is. What should Chris Christie do in the meantime? Now, he told yesterday he's got a big agenda, and he sat down again with the leadership and to go over what the next year has. But he's going to Texas now for a fundraiser. And in a perverse way, the Tea Party folks, they like him because they share a common enemy, which is, I guess, the New York Times or whatever, okay? But at a certain point, you can't just blame the media. It gets a little old and it gets a little weak.
What Governor Christie should do is exactly what he did today. Go about his business as governor almost as if nothing happened.
But he's also being a candidate in a way. He's going to the RGA. He's raising money.
Right.
He's going to CPAC.
Well, he should continue to do those things. What he did today is really good. Talk about Sandy Aid. That's something that people of the state care about.
That's tough questions about the funding,
decide how the funding is going to go. Do everything that you can. A couple of those appearances across the country, they're going to tell him, we don't want you to come in. So you keep that quiet. You do the appearances where you're welcome. You hope the polls turn around. You hope that there's no fire where there's smoke. But the governor's got some real problems, and he may not finish his term.
Why not? He should continue doing what he's doing. I mean, even you talk about people jumping to conclusions. The New York Times, Margaret Sullivan had to issue an apology, basically, for the New York Times online.
You're twisting that a little bit.
No, latest Christie story evolved. Times should have noted a change. That's the New York Times' own words.
All right. I'll let you have the last word on this. When we come back here, I do want to get into some interesting political news here, including on the Republican side. All of a sudden, party chairman's considering Donald Trump a legitimate candidate. I'll let you speak to that. And also, good sir, you're going to tell me what the Westchester Medical Center is doing here, because for the life of me, I don't understand how they get bailed out one day, and now all of a sudden they're not taking certain patients here. When we come back, everybody, we'll get into New York politics straight ahead.